Will you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Elijah, it seems, has got a problem. He's gotten stuck in the numbers game. Elijah is fixated on numbers like 12, the 12 tribes of Israel. These tribes were united into one kingdom under King David and Solomon. But after Solomon, a civil war split the tribes in two. And now up north, where Elijah lives, there are only 10 tribes. They are living under the reign of the evil King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, who have led the people to worship foreign gods. Elijah is haunted by numbers like three, the number of years of drought under which Israel has suffered. When God calls Elijah and tells him to propose a challenge, Elijah, the prophet of Yahweh, Israel's God, will face off against the prophets of the foreign god Baal. They go to Mount Carmel. They take turns crying out, praying, offering sacrifices to their gods. And whichever God sends the rain will be revealed as the one true God. 450. That's the number of prophets of Baal that Elijah must contend with. The odds are not in his favor. And yet, even then, Elijah triumphs over the prophets of Baal, for it is Israel's God who brings the rain. But even that blessing does not change the hearts of Ahab and Jezebel. Queen Jezebel sets out to kill Elijah, so he flees south to Beersheba. 125, that's how many miles Elijah runs. He goes to the wilderness and sits himself under a tree where he is left to face the lonely number 1. I alone am left, Elijah cries. It's all on me and I can't do it anymore. This is enough. Lord, take my life and let me die. Elijah is depressed. He is burnt out. His reserves of hope have all dried up, for Elijah is haunted by the numbers. I wonder, are there numbers that haunt you these days? Maybe you're haunted by the number 160. That's how many active wildfires were currently burning in New Mexico and Arizona as of yesterday. Or 968, that's a hard number, the number of people in the US who have been killed by gun violence this year alone. Maybe your mind is cycling on 20. That's the average number of daily new COVID cases in Taos County still. Maybe you're thinking about 10. The number of years scientists tell us we have left at best to change our ways before climate catastrophe becomes inevitable. Maybe for you, the numbers are less global and more personal. Maybe a recent medical test has revealed numbers that tell you something you don't really want to know. Maybe you've lost something or someone, and without them, nothing in your life adds up anymore. Maybe you're ruminating on numbers like 60, That's the average number of people in worship on Sunday before COVID hit here at this church. Compared to, say, the number 23, that's how many of us were here in person last week. Now we're online, so let's up it to 39. That's how many of us total were present online or in person, but that's more or less the state of things these days. Across the nation, our churches are finding that only 2/3 of the people who felt like church mattered before COVID still think it has a place in their life today. The numbers are hard. If it feels emptier in here on Sunday, that's because it is. If life feels more precarious these days, if it's harder than you remember it being, friends, I think that's because that's how things are. Hearing the numbers haunts you. If it makes you feel helpless or hopeless, perhaps it's because the numbers just aren't really good. Elijah is ready to throw in the towel. This experiment as God's prophet has run its course. Take my life, he says, for I am ready to give up. Now God tries to reach Elijah. All the ways that God has spoken to people in the past in the Old Testament. God shows up in a wind, and then an earthquake, and then a fire, but nothing gets through to this tired, burnt out prophet. Only when all the noise has passed and Elijah hears the sound of sheer silence does he come out of the cave to meet his God. Even then, Elijah is depressed. Even after meeting God face to face, he says, I am alone among your people. The numbers don't add up. Quite frankly, Lord, I'm ready to give this up. Elijah needs more than just to see God. Elijah needs to be able to see himself in God's story. And in God's stubborn refusal to give up on Elijah, that is exactly what God gives him. God doesn't try to encourage Elijah, to shore him up, to make him feel better. Instead, God simply says, go back home by way of Damascus, for I have sent you to anoint a new king over Israel. Go find a man named Elisha, for he will be the prophet with you and after you are gone. Yes, the numbers are bad, and quite frankly, they will get worse before they get better. But I will be with you. And listen, I will save a remnant of 7,000 people who are faithful. You will see the other side of this. You will not see it alone. Now, 7,000 people sounds like a lot to us. But out of the 40-some thousand people that scholars estimate made up that big United Kingdom of Israel, the numbers still aren't good. Suddenly I feel bad complaining that we're at 2/3 of capacity. Elijah's hardly getting 20%. But to twist Elijah's words a bit, it is enough. He is not alone. God is with him. God has a story of grace for God's people, and try as he might to back out Elijah, God is determined Elijah is going to be part of it. He will continue to serve God, and he will not do it alone. First Presbyterian Taos, generations and millennia later, the good news for us is the same. God stubbornly refuses to give up on us. I mentioned earlier that yesterday we started the big 225th General Assembly. Woo! But as I sat yesterday in this opening hybrid worship, I remembered something. I remember that 10 years ago in 2012, I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for the 220th General Assembly of our church. I remember sitting in that convention center with 1,000 of my closest friends and watching as those gathered representatives of our national church body voted no. The Presbyterian Church would continue not to perform and recognize gay same-sex marriages. It was a very close vote. It was deeply controversial, but the numbers simply did not add up. Like Elijah, I felt pretty discouraged. Like Elijah, I got stuck in the numbers. Faithful Presbyterians had been advocating for 50 years for marriage equality. LGBTQ folks had been in the church. My generation was leaving. We were sick and tired of this church that would not change. The tides had turned in so many other religious groups, but it just felt like we were where we are and nothing would ever change. Friends, what I did not know then is that I was watching the very last time that the Presbyterian Church USA would ever vote no on the full humanity of all people. What I didn't know is that 2 years later, I'd be sitting in another convention center with another 1,000 of my closest friends, when an overwhelming 75% of the church said yes. Yes, and we're sorry. It's time we started treating all people like humans. What I didn't know then that I know now is that 10 years later, I would be sitting here with the session of this church when you unanimously voted to hang up a rainbow flag for the first time, because it's Pride Month and people should know that they're welcome. Friends, what a difference 10 years or even 10 minutes can make. And here I was like Elijah, ready to sit under a tree and just give up. It's easy to feel hopeless when the numbers are bad. It's easy to trust that God's justice and love will simply not prevail in a broken world. It's easy to be discouraged, whether by climate catastrophe or empty pews, by devastating diagnoses or neighbors that just can't seem to get along. When the numbers are against us, it's easy to think we are alone. But God shows Elijah nothing could be further from the truth. This illusion that we're alone, that it's all up to us, only presents itself when our math does not account for the dynamic presence of God. When we forget to trust in the resources of divine grace, which specializes in making what was once impossible possible for God's people. Remember last week, we worship a Trinity, 3 equals 1. Friends, remember, even when the numbers are against us, God's math looks different than ours. God stubbornly refuses to give up on Elijah. and God stubbornly refuses to give up on us. God comes to us and gives us exactly what God gave Elijah. One word: go. Go wherever God is calling us next. For there is justice to be done. There are people to be served. There is a great big world out there, the one that God so loved that he sent his only son. So go, love, serve. Leave the rest up to God. We were never the ones writing the story to start with.